So, first things first, we are in the studio today here at the University of the Pacific for our episode of Humanizing Us. It is a podcast that I created to bring together people who are leaders, but particularly thinking about how they lead through the issues of their own identity and how they show up in the community. And I have in the studio today with me a leader of the Stockton community, Mr. Bivens, who is the president of the Stockton NAACP, the oldest civil rights organization in the United States. The Stockton chapter was chartered in 1931, according October 23rd, 1931. And Mr. Bivens has been at the helm for a number of years. And so I'm just looking forward to this conversation. You and I have met before and have had some conversations. And after meeting you, I knew for sure that you were one of the people that we felt it was really important to kind of have to talk about these issues of identity and social justice and what does all that mean now, as we try to create more humanizing environments. So, so Bobby, is it okay? I call you Bobby throughout this time we have together.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, Bobby, tell me a little bit about your journey here and what brought you to your the leadership role that you have now, leading the Stockton NAACP. And you can tell us a story about the things that led you to that work.
Okay. Well, thank you very much
Mhm.
for inviting me to participate in this. It's exciting, and I'm happy to have the privilege to share some of my journey and hopefully help other people in our community to see the ability that they have the ability to promote and cause change to happen.
Mhm.
It's extremely important. I am from originally from San Bernardino, California.
Mhm.
I went to San Bernardino High School. I went to San Bernardino Valley College. I
Mhm.
went to the University of Redlands on
Mhm.
a Kellogg fellowship, so I got to go there for free.
Mhm.
Um, and the University of Redlands, as you may or may not know, is also a religious backed school. They're Baptist
Mhm.
versus UOP being Methodist.
Absolutely.
Uh, but that's where a lot of our educational opportunities came about, being from the religious organizations in our country. In my childhood, I grew up uh, predominantly on the west side of town, which in Stockton would be comparable to the South Stockton.
Mhm.
Uh, I went through school at a time that our high schools were all desegregated,
In
and
San Bernardino,
in
California.
San Bernardino, California. However, the junior high schools and some of the elementary schools were segregated based on parts of town.
Mhm.
Um, During the summers, if you want to go to summer school, you had to go to the non desegregated Caucasian institutions.
Mhm.
And I oftentimes got in fights. I didn't finish a summer session
Mm.
because someone would call me out of my name,
Mhm.
and that just didn't work.
And when
Uh,
you say someone call you out of your name, I know exactly what that means, but basically for the listening or viewing audience, they basically did not call you by your name and most likely use a derogatory term.
they used the derogatory term, the N word,
Yes.
and that just didn't fly.
Mhm.
I also grew up in a time that the Ku Klux Klan had the audacity to march through our city
In San
in
Bernardino.
San Bernardino.
Mhm.
And I played football, I ran track,
Mhm.
and we got wind after a football game on a Friday night that the Klan was going to be holding a demonstration walking down the middle street.
Probably a
So,
main street.
of the main street in San Bernardino, and at that time was East Street.
Mhm.
And so the whole team gathered. We went down on East Street and beat up on the Klan.
Mm.
We wanted them to clearly understand that they were not welcome. They were not going to push their agenda on us. And the team was African American students, Caucasian students, Latino students. We didn't have very many Asian students in our schools at that point in time. No Vietnamese, no Cambodians, Laotian. That transgression had not taken place yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I started out kind of then and got involved in a campaign, a political campaign, where the mayor of San Bernardino at the time put shotguns on fire trucks, and this was the mid and late '60s,
Mm-hmm.
uh, because the Watts riots had taken place,
Yes.
and then a lot of youngsters in different places around the country decided that they wanted to show some expression of dissatisfaction with what was going on. So the mayor of San Bernardino decided that he was not going to have the firemen, quote, injured by rioters, and so he put shotguns on the fire trucks, and it made national news. But what people don't were not understanding by him doing that, it also put the city of San Bernardino in the limelight and out front, and then the federal government was seeing that we have all of these problems and we got to put some finances in the community and help
Mm-hmm.
quail these disruptions. And so the city of San Bernardino, as a result of that, garnered millions and millions of dollars for summer youth jobs, for boys and girls clubs, for building a mall, and all of that. And in that, we had some economic growth. And during this very same time, shortly thereafter, I got married at 18. And I had my summer, my biggest summer in life. I graduated from high school, got a job working in the aerospace industry 10 days later, had a baby 20 days later,
Mm-hmm.
got married 22 days later, and
Wow.
bought a house 20 days later.
Wow.
So between June and
December.
September
September.
of my high school graduating year, I had all these things taking place, and fortunately for me, my previous father-in-law was a realtor, so he was a black realtor, of course, and ultimately became the wealthiest black man in San Bernardino. But he was able to put the down payment on the house for
Mm-hmm.
my wife and I to have our own house at a young age. And on top of that, I turned 19 that summer. My wife was 16 when she had our first child and turned 17 during the summer as well. And we were determined for her to go back to school because she was finishing her junior year and finish high school on time.
Yes.
But at any rate, they didn't want her back in school because then you couldn't go to school if you were pregnant. They didn't want you there. You were grown and you were a
Mm-hmm.
bad influence on all the other kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a meeting with the vice principal of the school. Um, he didn't want her to come back to the school. We had a brand new principal that it came in my senior year, and so I went and met with him, and he reversed the decision of the vice principal and said, "Sure, Bobby, she can come to school and graduate on time,
Mm-hmm.
and she'll have to keep up her schoolwork." Well, back then, they also had schools that young ladies could go to continue their education. They were sponsored by the Salvation Army,
Yes.
um, so that they didn't fall behind. But they also had a little piece in there where if you kept the child, you had to pay for staying at that institution because it was on-site um, facility. And if you opted to adopt your child out, it was free. Um, And there were a good number of African American young ladies at that facility. But of course, we kept our child. That
Mhm.
was the intent. And I have to honestly say, my wife did not become pregnant by an accident. I didn't like her home environment, the way she's being treated. And at 17, 18, the only way my brain figured to get her out of there was to get her pregnant. We get married and go from there.
Mhm.
And uh,
So, well, what a story. What a story. So, first things first, I just want to pause for a moment, because you've just given us a window into understanding your early formation experiences. One of them that I heard you say, Bobby, was that visual, as more than a visual, because it was your life experience, your lived experience, but seeing an organized group of people that belong to one of the oldest hate groups,
right,
terrorist groups in
right.
the U.S. You have to call it what it is, right?
Terrorists.
It was a terrorist organization, the Ku Klux Klan, because their sole purpose was to terrorize Black people, so
Correct.
that they could not fully participate. But it was mainly terror,
Right,
even though they had a lot of other things they did. But the primary purpose was to terrorize the Black communities. So understanding the reason why they exist. When they march through a place such as a main street, you said it was E Street in San Bernardino, they
right,
were making a statement.
right, right,
People don't understand that when the group like that does something like that, they are visibly and they're comfortably and they're very appropriately letting you know who they are and they're seeking to terrorize.
right.
And the response that you had with this multiracial coalition of young athletes, that
Right,
didn't miss, so the
right,
role of the Black athlete, remember the
right.
role of the Black athlete has always been significant in the civil rights movement. And so here you as a teenager, as a young Black athlete with a multiracial group, stood up against this terrorizing organization, I'm sure, of adult men.
Oh yeah, they were adult men.
So they were older than you,
They
and you
were
stood up
older than
against them.
us, but we weren't afraid, and
Yes.
we a lot of us had grown up playing against each other in
Mhm.
various parts of the city.
Mhm.
And but when we all came together, we knew each other
Mhm.
from being opponents, and but we gelled as a team, Black, Latino, African, Caucasian, and so in that we all felt that it was a need to fight that, not let
Mhm.
that take place in our city.
Mhm.
We had a couple of Jewish fellows on the
Mhm.
football team as
Mhm.
well. So we all had a sense of history,
Yes.
and those that did not had a sense of team.
Mhm.
So when we went to confront them and engage them, uh, it was something.
Because you understood the history.
Oh yeah,
The Jewish students would understand the history as well. They would have
right,
learned that in their own
right.
households. And so this idea of setting something right, and you're saying not on our watch.
Not on our watch, not in
Basically
our
that
town.
not in our town and not on our watch.
Right.
And you did that as a young as well,
Uh,
17 is officially still, an adolescent, but you
right.
did it as a group of adolescents standing up. That tells me a lot about the choices that you made by even that early formation experience.
Well, from it, and it's, I was taught, you got to stand up.
Mhm.
My mother was from Oklahoma. My father was from Texas. My great grandmother was primarily responsible for most of the raising.
Mhm.
She was from Louisiana and born shortly after slavery ended.
Mhm.
So
This is your grandmother or great
my
grandmother?
great grandmother.
Mhm.
So she understood and she shared and she put information in my brain.
Mhm.
And of course, my aunties, her children also did, and my uncles were spoke to the fact that we're not going to take nothing from nobody.
Mhm.
So that as I grew up, I had that kind of training,
Mhm.
you might say.
Yeah.
And from then, I went on to work in the aerospace industry, but the department I worked in and the company was TRW, and they gave me a great opportunity.
Mhm.
Started out as a mail delivery clerk,
Mhm.
dealing with confidential documents,
Mhm.
classified, unclassified, secret, top secret. So this stuff that's going on right now, talking about Trump and the classified and secret documents, that was part of my earlier orientation. And from 18 to 22, I worked in that arena
Mhm.
and knew. So I know the significance of what's going on as it relates to that whole piece now. Okay, 50 years later.
Absolutely.
Um, but more importantly, in the company I went to work for, I had a white retired rear admiral that had decided to let me become a part of an elite group, and our task was to do planning, urban planning for cities and counties. Like I worked on the plan of development for Fresno. I
Mhm.
worked on the plan of development for Orange County. I was working on where Orange County is today when there were only strawberry fields
Yes.
and orange fields. Disneyland wasn't even there.
Yeah.
Knoxbury Farm was
Wasn't
the
there.
only recreational center that was major in California.
Mhm.
So I got to have those kind of experiences. And then they decided that they were going to make me be the first black vice president of the company. Now, mind you, we're talking about a company of 90,000 people that are in the aerospace industry. And ultimately, I had the opportunity to work on the scheduling of the first lunar walk.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow. That's once in a lifetime kind of opportunity, right?
It
Once in a
was, and
lifetime.
I was like 23 years old.
Mhm.
And so when I say these things, it becomes difficult for young people to even imagine that time frame.
Mhm.
The movie Hidden Figures.
Yes.
Well, all of that was going on that they were doing in the South, we in California working for TRW and Aerospace and McDonnell Douglas and all
Yes.
those corporations were doing the same thing out here. We didn't have computers. So, and the ones that we had would be rooms
Yeah.
of computers and only putting out little bits of information at a time. This right here
Yes. No.
has
No. Smart
so much
device.
more power than than what they had back then.
Yeah. An entire
And
room.
so when they talk about the sister calculating the comeback in from space, the significance of that is so deep. I got cold chill bumps on my
Mhm.
arm just thinking about knowing what that really was about. So I had that kind of push and encouragement, but they wanted me to be the first black vice president. Now, mind you, I didn't even have a college degree.
Mhm. This is a
Okay,
TRW.
I'm on an AA at this point,
Yes. But they see
and
something in you, and
it yeah, and it
this is
had to
early.
do with the
Uh-huh.
fact that I had changed the whole dress code within the corporation. Back then, you wore blue suits or black suits, red ties or blue ties, white shirt,
Mhm.
no colored shirts, no colored different colored suits,
Mhm.
and all that kind of stuff. So I'm coming in, bopping into work with Nehru suits on. Those were the shirts that had a collar that sat there, no collar really, but it set up,
Mhm.
and matching pants,
Mhm.
and all these different colors. And then wearing suits that were of different colors. And then the dress code where I was, the dress style started changing. And the vice president recognized it. So he said, this young man has influenced our whole style of dress,
Wow.
and we want to put him in a leadership position. My manager said, "Yeah, let's do that." And so they were going to force me. Now, mind you, I'm fighting this because I'm out. I grew up in the projects.
Mhm.
Okay, I
Mhm.
moved around, and I'm not, and I'm enjoying having my life. You know, shooting pool, doing having summer parties and
Hmm.
laying out and drinking wine and having a great time. I'm not wanting to be
Corporate.
this corporate spectacle in my mind.
Yes.
And so then they started taking me and my wife to theater, to plays, and sending limousines to pick us up and flying us here and there. And I'm like fighting this, and I'm telling my manager, I'm not going to do this. I'm saying, you know, we got brothers in here that are engineers, they got PhDs and all of them. And this white retired rear admiral said, Bobby, them folks are Toms. That's not what we want. We want somebody that has the courage to stand up. I've had fought in a couple of battles where some rednecks tried to fire me, and I prevailed. And so they just said, and I'm
I
serious.
believe you.
One of them was the head of the John Birch Society, which was came out of Orange County,
Hmm.
and which is just as bad as a Klan, except not as violent. They were more intellectuals.
Hmm.
But anyway, we they were forcing me to do these things, and I said, "Listen, I'm gonna be quitting." And so the aerospace shutdown was starting to happen, and I'm like, "I'm leaving here." And so they said, "We're gonna pay for you to go to school. And at the end of the semester, you bring your grades. We'll give you the money, and we will give you a stipend while you're going to school." And then they had to lay off a lot of people, and I was, you know, they laying off people and they paying me to go to school. Now, mind you, I'm still not wanting to do this. And so one day, Gary called me and said, "Would you mind if we take you off of the payroll so that we don't have to lay off a person that's here working?" I said, "You could have took me off the first day. I've told you I'm not coming back." But I'm saying all that to say that they taught me about programming, about scheduling.
Hmm.
We would do PERT charts. Are you familiar with PERT?
No, I'm not.
PERT stands for Program Evaluation and Review Technique.
Mm.
And you would do bubbles and chart out things that were going to happen simultaneously. It'd be one line, and then you come down to another line, and then the dates. It
Hmm.
was scheduled day by day, sometimes hour by hour.
Hmm. So
And
productivity as well as planning, project planning.
right,
Hmm.
exactly. And we're doing it by hand.
Hmm.
We don't have a
No
computer. So I'm
computers.
setting up, we had this paper that was grid paper that
Hmm.
we would put up on the walls, and it may go 60, 70 feet long just doing one chart. And we're writing. So we put them on the walls so we can do them. And you had to print, manually print, put these bubbles in, take a template, draw the circle, and then draw the second circle, and then write in the activity in between, which matched the date. We're doing all this by hand, not these,
Yes.
not a computer. And
Yes.
then they would take and put that information on a card that was called a punch card. And each punch card, it might take 1,000 punch cards to do one month activity, literally. So anyway, this is
Yeah.
all
Very,
old,
very labor intensive.
very,
Yeah.
very labor intensive. And while I was going to school, I'd come in when I wanted to come in, 2, 3, 4 in the afternoon. We had security, so you had to sign in. So they knew when I was coming in, they knew when I was leaving, and do my work. They'd leave it there for what I had to do, and my responsibility was get it done. And in the morning, when the regular employees came in, they'd pick up from where I had left off.
So I'm going to transition here because
Okay.
I want to get these early experiences and fast forward a bit to how you ended up continuing that work, but leading you into this role. And when you eventually made your way to Stockton and you eventually made your way formally doing civil rights work.
Okay. So through
Hmm.
that experience, they also were engaged in trying to do some community development type
Hmm.
work in our community. So
Hmm.
my manager said, "I'm going to send you and a tech writer over to help this black organization that's trying to write a grant to get funding to have jobs for young people on the west side of San Bernardino.
Mm-hmm.
So I go, and the uh, executive director of the organization, they were engaged in making African attire,
Mm-hmm.
dashikis, the long dresses, the head wraps, and doing fashion shows.
Uh-huh.
I walk in the door, and I know them. I live in the community, and I know of them. So I walk in, and they immediately start cussing me out and calling me a Tom, and that the white folks had sent me over there, and I wasn't nothing but a Tom, right? So I reciprocated with the cussing, walked out the door, told them what I thought, and went back to my office. And I said, I ain't doing nothing with them people. And so my manager said, you got to go back. You live over there. You understand the neighborhood. You understand the people. And you're going back. That's the assignment that I've given you, to help them come up with a grant application to receive funding. So I went back
For the community base, for the
for a
community
community-based organization,
to receive
nonprofit,
funding from this corporate entity that you work for.
right? That's
Okay.
called. Then the name of the organization was Operation Second Chance.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so I went back. We wrote the grant, and I was in charge of designing the cover. So what I did was show the black person in quicksand, reaching up, saying, "Help us, help ourselves."
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is 1970. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
They got a $50,000 grant to do a minority business development technical assistance center to help black and other minorities get into business.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, all the young people that had been engaged in the earlier process got laid off because a lot of them already had criminal records before they got to the program. And so I was hired on by the organization. Another friend of mine, he was hired on. But anyway, long story short, we got the grant, and then from then the organization started to grow. Ultimately, we were empowered to help cities, the city get money,
Mm-hmm.
federal money,
Mm-hmm.
in a couple of cases, the state. We ended up suing McDonnell Douglas and General Electric
Mm-hmm.
and the Department of Energy, and winning the lawsuit because they would not hire black people. They were not giving contracts to
Mm-hmm.
black people or other ethnic minorities. And so that started, we didn't know, but that started our decline because we had become too powerful in the community. We had, if you wanted to run for office, you literally had to come through our house,
Mm.
and we had to say that you were truly going to help black people.
Yeah.
Everybody else, and people have to remember, when black people get help or get something, or our strength, then everybody else
It's lifted.
benefits.
Everyone benefits.
Every time you look at every movement in our country, you look at every equity or ethnicity type activity, black folk have set the stage, opened the door, and everybody else benefits.
Absolutely.
And very often we end up going back to the end of the line on something that we opened up for everybody else. This past year, the Minority Business Development Agency just became a full fledged agency within the federal government structure. We were a TA consultant for a Minority Business Development Agency in the 70s, and every year they had to go and get their Congress to approve them a continuing resolution so that they could keep operating. This last year, in this Biden administration, this year, they finally became a standard federal um, agency. And now they don't have to go back every year and get a continuing resolution to keep helping minority businesses in our country. Our local congressman here, Jerry McNerney, pushed that piece. My son worked for Jerry McNerney and brought it up, and wrote it up, and pushed that piece that ultimately went through Congress that made that a standing agency.
Yeah,
Okay,
that work came.
10-year 10-year task.
Yes, and it came specifically at the advocacy of Black leadership.
That's
That's
right.
the point
And
that you're
he
making.
and at that time, and my son was the policy director for the Congressional Black Caucus
Hmm.
during that shepherding of that piece.
Yeah.
And I'm not bragging.
Yes.
I just want to know. And this comes from all the way back there when I started out working with Mbita and pushing him as he worked for the congressman and ultimately became a CBC staffer in the CBC to make that happen. So we have to learn that many of our changes have taken a long amount of time. I was so proud that it became an entity, a permanent entity this year, because for me, it represented a 50-year journey,
Absolutely.
literally a
Literally
50-year journey
journey.
from 72 to 2002.
So this is one of the benefits that we have today in having you here is that oftentimes um, I think people understand cognitively, like and from a book sense, what the Black freedom struggle has done for the rest of the country. I think people understand it and cognitive, but they don't really understand how civil rights for Black people has actually opened up all the civil rights for everyone, for
Right,
women, for
right,
other
right,
people of
right.
color, for Latinos, for Asian Americans, for Indigenous peoples, and even the LGBTQ movement as well.
Exactly.
Um, and at the same thing, we know that Black people are not a monolith. We intersect with all those various communities in various ways, but you cannot remove the role of the Black freedom struggle in
No.
creating freedom and liberation and opportunities for development and growth and liberty and pursuit of happiness. All those other communities have benefited directly because of how the
Exactly.
Black community has
Exactly.
shown up. Talk to me a little bit about this idea. Because you're a Californian, as we're both native Californians. Um, I think the way that when you're Black and you've been raised in California, our approach to civil rights is always from a place of solidarity. Because I think it has to do with the multicultural, pluralistic environment, particularly of California. It doesn't mean that other places and other people don't do that, but I think it's something very significant. I think a signature for Black people that are come through a California context. Not all of us, but definitely for some of us. Talk to me about this idea of what you see is, if we're going to have a full democracy, it must be racial. It must be inclusive of a multiracial group of people. And the NAACP, the NAACP, has been at the forefront of that. What do you think? Where do you think we are at right now in relation to this idea of having a true multiracial democracy?
Um, Ideally, it's a great,
Hmm.
ideally.
Ideally.
In practical application, uh, other groups emulate what we have done in making progress and then feel that they should take the place of us in those spaces. Example, the women's movement.
Hmm.
Had we not, if you go back in history and you look at black men were able to vote before women
Yes, that's
of
true.
any color.
Hmm.
And as we went through changes, those rights started disappearing, or we started being incarcerated and uneligible to vote,
Yes.
uneligible to take care of our household. And so each step of progress that has been made in this country, for the most part, that has had the most significant impact, has been led by black people, whether it was the Pullman workers on the trains,
Hmm.
at the same time that the Irish and the Germans were fighting to get jobs in the
Mhm.
mills,
Mhm.
in the uh, steel plants, and the wood plants, and coal mines. We were fighting to unionize so that everybody,
Mhm.
because we're looking out for us, but everybody benefited from the unionization in America.
Mhm.
That came from the black Pullman workers, the
Mhm.
folks that worked on the trains. And as they were able to unionize and they were able to convince the government and the civil rights workers of the day uh, that were engaged in that, made it caused it to be beneficial for everybody,
Mhm.
because when we get benefits, everybody else gets them.
All we
And
understood as a people that all boats rise.
right,
You know, when you try
that's
to
right.
do the right, you everybody could have
So,
participate.
so when you turn around and you look at new immigrants
Mhm.
coming to this country and have the audacity to turn their nose up on black people, or think that, or want to assume that we've been lazy, or we've just allowed and tolerated all of this activity, that means they come here, they know nothing of our history, and
Mhm.
they know nothing about what black people's contribution has been that has allowed them to come here and be free people.
Mhm.
Um, so that type of migration and immigrant attitude is a block for what we're talking about in terms of a totally immersed population that's moving forward together. Doesn't matter where they come from,
Mhm.
what continent,
Mhm.
including some black folk
From
that come
Africa.
from other countries as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. So this idea of having a multiracial democracy is what you're saying is that because of various waves of individuals who come into the U.S. Who buy in to mindsets, to attitudes, to beliefs that are inaccurate about who Black people are, and not understanding the African American experience and contribution to all civil rights. What happens then is that as we try to move forward to try to have this multiracial democracy, you have individuals who bring their own shortcomings, their own prejudices, and their own biases. And it's very difficult to do that work when they're not willing to see the full humanity of Black peoples.
Correct. Absolutely, totally correct. And also, when people are able to look at the way that the immigration policies take place in this country, where it's okay for, because there's a war in the Ukraine, to bring Caucasian or non-melanist people to this continent, while black folk or melanist, very melanist people in coming from Africa or the Caribbean are not welcome in here, where Haitian people are beaten away from the borders and horses are pushing them back. And so even seeing that uh, picture says that it's okay for them because they're the good folk, but it's not okay for people to look like me because they're not contributors or they're not good folk.
Mhm.
And then you look at the continuing punishment of Haitians because they were not did not allow the Europeans to take over their country and make them be slaves. And so they've been punished ever since for winning battles against European invaders. And so then, when the people here in the United States and North America think about the slave trade, and I just had to go to a local elementary school last week because my granddaughter was in class, and the history teacher started out this school year talking about starting with slavery, and the presentation was insulting or demeaning to black kids, with two black kids in the class and
Mhm.
everybody else being non-black, multiracial but
Mhm.
non-black. Uh, so I had to say to him, "You start our history, you go way back.
Absolutely.
You go before we came to this country, when we were kings, queens. warriors, maidens. We did all types of things, and we were wealthy in our country with a different value on wealth versus when we came here to be the wealth, to be the free workers, and those kind of things. And so what he said was, well, last year I took the seventh graders and I taught them the history from after Christ up to now. And I said, but you started this year out and you didn't give a context or an introduction to why we're starting at this point. So those kids that were not a part of your class last year that are fresh in there are seeing it from here, and then you're having them do some things that are in fact derogatory for black children and how it's being presented.
Yeah.
And so, but that's the same thing that people that come here that think and are educated by institutions with leadership that doesn't realize the real story or doesn't want to tell the true story of our value to this country. So then when they're teaching new students that have come from other places, then they're also giving them that same message.
They're perpetuating
The lie.
inaccuracy and a lie.
Yeah.
So one of the things, the NAACP is the oldest civil rights organization in the United States.
Right.
Okay. One of the roles that the NAACP has played over the course of its history is to do exactly what you described with that situation you mentioned that with the school teacher is to educate and to put things into context,
Right.
into historical context. If there's any group in America that knows how to put things into a historical context, it's the NAACP. Even if it's an issue and they put out a statement, it's rare that you see a statement. It doesn't even matter what the issue is. Whatever the incident
Right,
happened,
right.
whatever state, whatever city, whatever industry, they always note historical context.
That's right.
They always give a reference. So whatever it is that we're dealing with, they always kind of here's the context of this. And so this idea of context and how Black people in America have such a grounded perspective on the US context more than anybody does. That's the reason why when we work for anything, doesn't matter we work for ourselves or we work for
Right.
someone else,
Exactly.
Black children have bigger context. They understand things deeper. Black adolescents, they have a bigger context, even as they're growing and learning. Black adults, and then even Black elders, we have these contexts that we can't function in the world because we're not allowed to function in the world without knowing some of our history. And
Right.
then the thing is that we don't even know not just our own history, we end up knowing more about sometimes other people's history than they know about themselves.
Right.
So this thing about having context is really essential for all civil rights work. You can't do social justice work out of context.
Right. You cannot.
You cannot. So talk to me a little bit about this, some of the work that you see that is continuing on, and you've been talking about your life from a 50-year span, and some of the things that you've probably seen 50 years ago, from the scene and the very powerful scene you gave us as a high school student athlete of confronting those terrorists in your hometown, the city of San Bernardino, to the work you're doing and the work you have been doing here in Stockton, California. The purpose of your organization is a mission of racial equality and equal justice for all, but to look specifically at the Black American experience. You're doing it by looking at issues of health and housing, issues with criminal justice, political action, how to take political action, being a source for organizing the community or bringing coalitions of people together, depending on what the issues are. Your clear mission is around youth empowerment and youth engagement. And then there's all the other various issues that kind of come in, whether it's, it might be emergency rental assistance in one case, it may be voter suppression issues in another,
Right.
it may be
All
student
in
debt.
the same day.
Student debt, which we know President Biden just made a major announcement of doing some debt relief. It could be police brutality. It could be issues of reproductive rights, and we see what happened with Roe v. Wade this past June of 2022. It could be hiring and making sure that Black people can get contracts, But even in all of that, we people know that the NAACP has always been at the forefront of dealing with legal redress, So, the national office may take on different cases depending upon how it fits into the overall civil rights, framework, or like what do we have to do as an
Right.
organization
Right.
to send our lawyers to deal with this particular case because it might be one that turns the tide in a particular situation.
Right.
So being a part and a leader in an organization like that, the most storied civil rights organization in the United States, and people will say the most storied civil rights organization in the world.
Right.
The NAACP is powerful.
Well, our new slogan is NAACP means power.
Means power.
Power. And that was our theme this past summer at our national convention.
Hmm.
And the victories that we have, oftentimes people don't even realize they've happened
Hmm.
because we're not out bragging that we just did this or we
Hmm.
just did that.
Hmm.
Uh, take a local example. Our we just got our first black police chief.
Yes, Chief
Um,
McFadden. He
yes,
came to us from the city of San Jose
right,
with a really wonderful storied career himself, an
correct,
exemplary career.
correct.
Uh huh.
So, but had the city manager, who was also black, not been able to take the courage to recruit outside of the police department, which is historically only hired chiefs out of that police department
A small pool.
and a small pool and a history of negative culture toward black people and other people of color, but in particularly black people, then we would not have had a nationwide recruitment and we would not have had an opportunity to bring this chief here. Now, I'm one of a group of people that have said to the city manager, we got to go outside so that we
Hmm.
can get justice.
Hmm.
We got to go outside to at least afford the opportunity for change. The previous chief uh, talked a lot and was visible, and you would think that all kinds of things were going on because of what he promoted perception wise.
Hmm.
But in actuality, we didn't get two black cops under 6, 7 years of his leadership promoting equity, equality, recruitment, even following my direction of sending recruiters to the NAACP National Convention. All of that resulted in basically zero,
Hmm.
whether it was women or black officers. Now we got Latino officers, we got some Asian American officers of different Asian
Hmm.
groups, but black folk, So the the facade that was portrayed was that I really care and we're really going to do this, but the result was zero
Yeah.
for all intents and
Hmm.
purposes. So at least now we have a person that's worked in a multicultural police department that
Hmm.
has managed more people in one department in San Jose than a whole police force in Stockton, California.
Yeah.
There's resistance. There is the racial resistance of following orders from a black person. There's also the cultural resistance because now we don't just get to freely use language that is not appropriate or have attitudes that is not appropriate or not beneficial to the entire
Hmm.
community. But again, it comes from one, having a person that's capable of handling that job,
Hmm.
two, having another person that had guts enough to make the step to do it, and having a council that was willing not to block it.
All those
So
things had to
all
come
those
together.
things had to come together. And for years, we've advocated for outside recruitment. We've advocated for changing the culture of the police department. All of these, for many years, we had a revolving door of chiefs, and all of those different chiefs that
Mhm.
came in did not improve the numbers of
Mhm.
black people working in the police department, let
Mhm.
alone the negative image that young kids and young people
Mhm.
that you need to have feel good to
Mhm.
come and be a part of the local police department because they grew up here and know people in the neighborhoods. They didn't want to be a part. So hopefully,
Mhm.
where we are now will cause a cultural change. But again, it's going to take time over years. You know, some
Absolutely.
of it in the schools, some of it bringing people in, some of it um, where just someone says, well, maybe I'll take a chance because
Mhm.
I may have a better opportunity. Sending folks to the post academies that are anti black, and
Mhm.
then the students going there, and on day one, you're being told that you don't belong here,
Mhm.
and they're not going to be successful in completing the training to become a law enforcement officer. But the other is to talk about the law enforcement community at large, not just being a policeman,
Mhm.
working for the Justice Department, working for the district attorney, working for the CIA.
Mhm.
Law enforcement is a big pool. One of the top universities in the nation is Florida A&M, and they have a partnership with the FBI where they have internships for black students to go and work in the FBI and be able to graduate and go on the jobs. But our chief never went to Florida A&M, and I said to him, "Go to Florida A&M." My son just graduated with his degree in law enforcement, and he knows some people on the campus. He can take you around, introduce you to the professors and to the counselors and the vice
Yeah.
president, where you can recruit some folks.
But the thing though is now what you're saying is that the right pieces came together.
The right pieces
It's about
seemingly have
but it's
come
about
together.
leadership.
Yes,
Now, this work that today they call it DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it has been the work of civil rights movers for the last 400 years. And
right,
really, if you really think about it, the last 250 years, they have
right,
been moving this work forward.
right,
A lot of people want to do this work, and a lot of people are engaged in it. And I think one of I've been responsible for educating a whole generation of practitioners. They're out in the field now. Former students, both graduate students, they were as well as undergraduates who are doing this work in a multitude of industries, including higher education. And one of the things that I always had, with a group of young people that worked in my office, like some of them we have in the studio today, is to make sure that they were grounded in historical contexts because
correct,
I understood that you can't do this work outside of a historical context. And once you understood the historical context, then that helped you um, uh, find solutions that were more honest and more inclusive. And the honest piece was that you really understand that you can't do this work if you don't center people of color, but if you don't center Black voices. If you actually do not find a way, it doesn't even matter what type of issue you're trying to solve. If you don't understand what the Black narrative is and what the Black experience is,
right,
around anything. It could be
right,
maternal health, it could be criminal
right.
justice, it could be about housing. But if you don't understand that community's experience, then you're missing a really key part of understanding what it is, what needs to happen in order to address it. Um, what's your thought, around as we are working and as you have worked and we continue to work with people that, you know, for all fair purposes are trying to do their best, but they're in these leadership roles and whatever that leadership role is. And they say, but I have so many competing, so many constituents. There's so many stakeholders, and I can't do this and I can't do that. And at the same time, as an educator, as someone that's been doing social justice education for years, I understand that you can't do this work if you don't pay attention to this particular voice, these particular experiences. How do you navigate and negotiate that, particularly with all the various types of leaders? You have both corporate leaders, you have not-profit leaders, you've got all these various stakeholders, Bobby, that you have worked with over a period of time, and trying to help them to do better work so that the community overall is better, and knowing that they may see you coming and they may say, "Oh, NAACP cares about Black people," but and I know that the organization has been lifting up the entire country for decades.
Right.
But they don't know that, or they don't understand it,
Or they don't care.
or they don't care. How do you kind of navigate that? This idea of people, when they say they have too many stakeholder groups and they don't understand the power of what they can do if they really understand the agenda of the NAACP.
Well, I would say one thing is really that you have to have a commitment to change.
Mhm,
It's not a job,
mhm,
it's a lifestyle.
mhm,
What I do, I don't get paid to do.
mhm,
That's the first thing that people don't understand. I'm not a paid employee of the NAACP. I'm a local president that volunteers and does this work on a daily basis. I lose and have lost lots of money because of speaking up on issues instead of taking my consulting firm and being a nice guy and going and do some stuff and showing people how to correct different types of
mhm,
things. So you got to have a commitment to making change.
mhm,
When I was in junior college, I wrote a paper that I'm a slave to my people, blah blah blah, and it was based on how I felt about myself and what my role is in my own local community. We built a vocational education center that was far ahead of the universities and colleges. At the
mhm,
vocational school that I was the administrator of, we were doing robotics in the 70s.
mm,
We were doing electronics and electronic repair. We were doing things that were not happening in MIT, USC, Harvard, Yale, UOP,
mhm,
because we had a partnership with TRW,
mhm,
and they were showing us and helping us to prepare for the future and create job training that what people would be doing years down the road. We were too far ahead of our time, quite frankly.
mhm,
It was great. It was, I had 80% of the manpower money that came into the community. So if 18 million came in, I had about 13 of that 18, realistically, to do job training. But I learned in that uh, getting people into workplaces where there were no black people uh, was you got to convince these Caucasians or the corporate heads that these people are better than your people. So my students had to be initially secretaries, not clerks. So that meant they took shorthand typing, bookkeeping, and they had their high school diplomas or their GEDs or some college and put them in different places to open the door so that another person could get a job in there. And
mhm,
if it didn't work out, call me. Let me come pull that person, give you another person because the first job may not work out for somebody. I've had the blessing of being in various places.
mhm,
I worked for the county government. I was a contract compliance administrator. And inside the county government, I set up a minority business development center in the government.
mhm,
The administrator said, "You're always running your mouth, so what can you do? How long will it take you to do it? Can you do it?" And I said, "I can do it. Give me 5 years and the backing of the board. I need the political backing of the board and the chief legal counsel because I'm gonna get us sued."
mhm,
We got sued. We never lost
mhm,
because I did my homework. But the fact is, minority businesses got to come in and do business with San Bernardino County government. Ultimately, a state law was written by Maxine Waters, which was the affirmative action laws for the state of California. She and I worked together on different issues because somebody had to go out and be the bad person so she could come in, collect the data, and introduce a law and bring about change in California.
Mhm.
So you got to understand the total dynamic of what you're doing because to help home, sometimes I have to go to the state or go to the to DC,
Mhm.
or to help DC, it might have to come from home and we do something and say it's provable. We've proven it and it
Mhm.
can work,
Mhm.
you know.
And it can
So
be scaled.
and that's right.
Mhm.
And in a community like Stockton, it is small enough to make change and
Mhm.
have it be visible
Mhm.
versus if you're in San Francisco or LA, where there are many, many, many people, and that small, significant impact is not visible because there's so much stuff.
Yeah, competing.
Okay,
Uh-huh.
so we are perfect, a perfect community to bring about change that can be modeled around the
Yes.
nation. But
Mhm.
we have to give up our selfish, money hungry attitudes and behavior. We have to fight those folks that will lie, and just like Michael Tubbs no longer being the mayor, he's the greatest thing that happened here, but jealous people could not allow that to take place. So now we have a nice guy that's the mayor, but he doesn't have all the resources. He
Mhm.
doesn't have the mindset to be able to bring in different foundations, to bring in governmental entity, to talk about uh, having a subsidy program for low income people that is now being modeled
The
around the
country.
nation.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have to learn to think outside of the box and not be afraid to take the chance.
Mhm.
My attitude is if I do A or B or C, what's the worst thing that's going to happen to me? The worst thing that can happen to me is that somebody kills me. And if they kill me, then the idea continues to grow because they killed me because I was bringing the idea. You know, same thing with, I'm not comparing myself to King, but that's what happened when
Mhm.
they assassinated King. That's what happened when they assassinated Malcolm.
Mhm.
You know, so we have many, or Medgar Evers,
Mhm.
a lot of models of folks that got wiped out one way or the other. And the assassination does not have to be a physical death. They can fire you,
Mhm.
and you're moving an agenda here that has not ever been moved in this institution before. And all the president has to do is say, well, I thought I wanted to do that, but you know, this is a little bit more costly than I planned on having. So, Mary, thank you. And we're going to be going in a different direction because it's always a different direction that we're going in when we get rid of black folk that are making changes that don't feel good to white folk. Okay.
Mhm.
And then this group of students that are here are the students that are following, are the students that have heard about you, no longer have you here as a role model and a hope. So folks don't mind dashing our hope. They will wipe out our hope. Removing Michael Tubbs from being the mayor of Stockton has dashed hope because many things that were in the works will not happen now because the capability, competence, and vision are not there by jealous people that are small minded, that have not produced or delivered a thing. Okay?
Mhm.
But we'll tear down, but will we build up? Yeah, we need to build up. That's what we as black people have to do is build up. Our young kids out here can't be busy growing plants of marijuana and selling it or smoking it when the NAACP fought to legalize marijuana to help black people that would have been incarcerated for having small amounts of
Small.
marijuana in their possession.
Mhm.
That's why we fought for the legalization of marijuana.
Yeah.
Folks don't even understand it. Gay people, we were the main pushers here in California, our state conference office and our state conference president, to get the NAACP at a national level to pushed the agenda of equality for gay and lesbian people. That's what they're being called at that time. We
And
didn't
for
have all the alphabet.
and the marriage
And
equality.
the marriage equality, because it wasn't about morality, it was about legality and civil rights and equal rights. If I were a gay person in the hospital, my mate should be able to come and see me. And if I die, they should be able to get my insurance, just like if, as I am being married to a woman. It was about that, not about morality. So I had many discussions with ministers in this community related to that to help them understand. You don't have to marry them, send them to the courthouse. They get married at the courthouse. But you don't try to put your morality on it until you're willing to get rid of the person that's leading your choir, playing the piano, or your membership because you want their tithes. Okay, so that's a message
It is.
that we oftentimes have to carry that is not a popular message.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm not sleeping in somebody else's house. I sleep in my house. What they do behind their doors is their business. What you do to them in a public forum, like a medical care or insurance, or even incarcerating people because you don't like them and you want to put them in jail and get them beat up or abused. That's a message that we have to carry. And it's a message that we push for Black people in terms of how we're treated. So we can't say over here that we're fighting for equality for Black people and not fight for equality for other people that are being discriminated against, because that's what we do.
That's what we do.
That's what we do.
That's what NAACP does.
That's
And in many ways, that's what Black people do. We fight for our
right.
equality and
That's
we
right.
fight for other people's
And we may
equality.
not even be the benefactors of what we're fighting for, but it comes at some point in time.
So I want to transition a bit. You know, we're getting
And
closer to
I'm
the.
going all over the place
That's
that you ain't
okay.
trying to go.
This is a good conversation, and it's really important to document this too.
Set of people that would never hear from me because they're not going to get in the space to hear from me first.
So that was two things, and we're coming down to the last moments we have. Um, Bobby Bivens, it has been really a pleasure just to sit down with you. There's a wealth of history there. There's a wealth of understanding how change works and how it's a process, um, and um, and that we have the wherewithal to do it. We just
Right,
need to be able to leverage it. We need to know our history. We need to understand those processes,
right.
and then it sounds like we also got to be courageous too.
Yeah, you got to be courageous. You know, it's if you're afraid, then you lose. Okay. If but so we have to step out and be willing to serve on boards and commissions and not just be happy to be in the room, but to speak up and make sure that there's equity and equality that's taking place. Because when they're writing those grants or when they're seeking the funding or when they're talking about policy change in the city, then we have to speak up so that the policy changes are beneficial to everybody and not just a particular group of people.
Mm.
Um,
And that's what we do. I want to say thank you because I think our time has come up to an end.
yeah.
We're getting little signals from production saying we're at our end.
Right.
Perhaps we can do this another time and do part two.
We can do that.
Okay, all
We
right
can do
then.
that
We'll
because we
plan.
didn't get there.
No, we didn't get there. We have more to go there.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So thank you so much for being here today in studio at the beautiful campus, Stockton campus of the University of the Pacific.
Well, thank you for inviting me. And what I do want to say is that join the NAACP. We are the cheapest union in the nation. Our membership's only $30 a year, or $750 for a life membership that you can pay $75 a year for 10 years. Please join. We need the warriors. We need the workers. We need to impact our community for the future.
Thank you. That's the NAACP president, Stockton branch, Bobby Bivens. doing a call to action for all of us.
That's
Thank you.
right.
Thank you
That's
so
right.
much, Bobby.
Thank you.